This is a reality check. It made for great TV and clickbait, but there was never going to be a fascist takeover of America's cities. There was an attempted coup, but it was mainly just embarrassing. It would take somebody actually clever to orchestrate something like what Adolf did. Trump and his sycophants can't even keep their stories straight for an hour. His campaign's always been a clown car wreck. And if they weren't stealing so much of our money and wreaking so much chaos, it would be really funny. But we know about all that. The big story here is why so many people would gobble up any excuse to throw themselves behind so obvious a fake macho man. But that's what 70 million people did. Because white America is having an identity crisis. And as it turns out, when your identity is based on fiction, you will defend that fiction as if your life depended on it. A nation with a false history, told that they're the greatest people on earth, feeling humiliated by reality, are going to follow anybody, no matter how ridiculous, if they're promised revenge. And in the end, they're going to destroy themselves in the process, whether their hero is Mussolini, or that pharaoh who chased Moses, or a reality show host. But to let the Trumpites off the hook a little bit, our public square is now privately owned, for sale to the highest bidders, which is the inevitable result of the business model of our nation having always been at cross purposes with the business of being human. Marketing campaigns work, and Make America Great Again took those who fell for it, mostly by regional misfortune, back to that mythic American origin story of righteous might and moral authority. In reality, the America they've been trying to dial us back to was 1692 Salem, when the colonies were just the little playthings of their English lords, and the colonists' demented version of Christianity gave them night terrors about everything outside the settlement walls. When First Nation natives and Africans weren't human, when women were property, when justice meant burning witches, and science was seeing if they float first. That is how stupefying it is to imagine that the AT&T owned CNN, which makes $200 billion a year in corporate advertising, and Joe Iraq oil war Biden belong in the same sentence as socialism. Socialism is a word that's been turned into a Pavlovian response trigger to make people quiver in fear about the quality of life in Japan, the UK, Israel, Canada. Socialism is simply the belief that a society should regulate its institutions rather than allow private tyrannies to oppress the peasant class. The same fundamental principle as a democracy or a republic. All of these words refer to a government run by the people. None of them applies to CNN, and barely any of them apply to this country. Let's make this even simpler. Either kings and feudal lords rule the people, or the other way around. Those are our two choices, and it doesn't matter what we call it. What matters is that we face the truth. And what's happening right now is our karma for not dealing with our cultural monstrosities sooner. White America is having a psychotic break that has been a long time coming. The majority of white people voted for a reality show host to save them. That says it all. Democracy was saved by the majority of black women and men and people of color and a minority of whites. White people have like one more shot to redeem themselves before the natural demographic shifts in the country just do it for us. We have to get our origin story straight and face our childhood trauma. And until we do, we're going to have a collective mental health crisis. So one more time for the people in the back. We are a nation founded by extremists who lied and killed and stole this land, who refused to outlaw slavery as part of our Declaration for Independence, and whose self-rule was only for white aristocrats who owned land and believed that they had a God-given right to it and nobody else did. Now, regardless of the myths, that is not what Jesus believed. After the Civil War over slavery, white America enabled the Confederacy to rise to power again, rather than uplifting and embracing the black women and men who helped build their empire. In the 1930s, white America didn't want to let in the Jews fleeing the Holocaust. National hero Charles Lindbergh wanted America to form a neutrality pact with Hitler. The airwaves were filled with Nazi sympathizers. In the 60s, whites didn't want to sit in the same part of the bus, or the same classrooms, or even restaurants as the descendants of slaves. White people were appalled at the protests, threatening the good order of our caste system. Martin Luther King diagnosed the illness of the white moderate, who paternalistically believes that he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who praises incremental change and compromise and unity with white nationalists. Dr. King protested, saying the time is always ripe to do right. Now is the time to make real the promise of democracy. Those were his words, and the country killed him, and Jack and Bobby Kennedy, and Malcolm X, and countless others, for daring to challenge our extremism, which continued. White America elected Nixon, and then Reagan, and then Clinton, who militarized police forces and incarcerated black and brown people and poor people at rates never seen in the history of the world. In the 2000s, white supremacy found a new way to shock and awe. They invaded a country that was no threat to us, with the rallying cry, "Support the troops," as if it was the troops' idea. They killed 100,000 people for empire building, just like they've always done. And most of America gave it a pass because it was an Arab nation and it seemed far away, and the way we like our media is for entertainment purposes only. And the bipartisan war criminals and bank fraudsters and oil spillers and plunderers of the world, they hugged and took selfies in the name of what Dr. King called the white moderates' devotion to their sense of order over justice. But the majority of whites were so triggered by a black president and the dawning reality that the feudal lords really don't care about the peasant class, they elected Trump, an infamous racist rich kid grifter, in the hopes that he might protect them. This guy was famous for stiffing people who worked for him. And his celebrity crime family brings our fragile order into chaos, and some people are surprised. There's a virus killing 2,000 people a day. And we know how to stop it, but we're not, because we're still arguing with reality. So those who think there was ever a normal that we should go back to are in the deep end of our collective identity crisis. We want to go back to normal as just the PC way of saying, "Make America great again." President Biden speaks with a civility and a warmth that is a great relief. He also voted for and promoted that oil war as chair of the Foreign Relations Committee in Congress and on the talk show circuit. One of the first people that he's delegated to handle our life-threatening climate crisis is a top recipient of fossil fuel money, a former consultant to the notorious cancer and birth defect-causing DuPont Company. This guy has such a horrific environmental record. The actual Aaron Brockovich just penned an editorial in The Guardian entitled, "Dear Joe Biden, are you kidding me?" And of course he's not kidding. And of course all Biden's cabinet picks are being gushed over by the corporate media, which Republicans are rightfully disgusted by. But their solution to aristocracy is monarchy, because they're even more attached to 17th century European caste systems than the left. But the truth is, all these guys are eating from the same trough. Big banks, insurance, big oil, big auto, pharmaceuticals. That club doesn't fight to stop the abuses of their own membership. Almost every president we've ever had wanted one thing more than anything else: to get into that club and stay in it. And that club doesn't include you and me. And that's why income, education, and healthcare inequality are at unsustainable levels. It's why our criminal justice system is still a human rights catastrophe, and why we've barely begun dealing with the climate crisis, and our politics are a national joke. We do not need any more of the right or the left sides of the white aristocracy to unite. We need to face our childhood trauma and grow up. Every lawyer who is engaged in this frivolous, vexatious litigation to suppress the votes of black and brown people should be disbarred. This disinformation campaign that's killing 2,000 Americans a day, it shouldn't be censored on social media. It should be prosecuted. Snake oil senators stealing our tax dollars for their paymasters during a global emergency should be prosecuted because stealing is wrong. The rule of law demands no pardons for these delinquents that briefly occupied our White House. We can have mercy, but this is a reality check. The words far left are being used to describe U.S. domestic policy 80 years ago, and services every developed nation delivers now. We have to upgrade our institutions that are 200 years out of date if we hope to survive the century. Now, the Trumpites, they love to pretend they're protecting the roots of Western society, but even a tree knows that its purpose is to keep growing. I mean, these people, they're the barbarian hordes that burned Rome to the ground. The Tiki Torch wavers, they had a chant. They said, "You will not replace us." Well, that's exactly what we're going to do. We can heal, but only if we admit we started this whole thing broken. White America, it's time to join the 21st century. Suck it up and put a mask on. And before you start thinking we're going to split off into a blue country and a red one, no, we're not greenlighting more pollution or another arms race or founding another new white terrorist nation. Dr. King said either we go up together or we go down together. This culture of every man for himself and winner take all, that's got to go the way of the savages that we evolved from. You remember, we used to call them the Pilgrims. The path forward has been laid out for thousands of years. Your favorite book, it says it like this: you can't make money and power your master and work toward the highest good at the same time. You got to pick one. Well, this time it's now or never. That's the challenge of our generation. And we're up for it. We were made for this. But it's going to take all our strength. In the days to come, we have to demonstrate the human values that belong to an advanced society. As long as there's a war in ourselves, there will be war in the world. So may you be in a state of peace and clarity. May you know who you are.